Alrighty, for this brisket cook, we are cooking it on the Oklahoma Joe's Highland offset smoker. We're going to use some charcoal briquettes in the firebox with some beautiful Australian ironbark wood splits as our smoking wood. Let's get to it. Alright, so the first step here is we're going to trim the fat off this brisket. So have a look here. Most big cuts of meat, especially a brisket, are going to have what's called the fat cap. And this is that big layer of fat on top of the meat. So you can see it's quite thick on some sides here, but a little bit lacking in other ends. Now, you always want to trim down your fat cap on a brisket. Reason being is you have a look at this big fat corner here on this edge. This will not render down. It's that big thick collagen fat that is just going to sit there on top of the cook. It's going to prevent your bark from forming, and you're going to get really poor results. But what you don't want to do is take away all the fat. The rule of thumb generally, now this depends on the size of the meat, but generally is around 1/4 inch of fat left as the fat cap. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to trim this brisket fat cap down to around 1/4 inch. And what that allows the fat to do is the little bit of fat that's left will render down into the meat, stop it from being too lean and drying out, and it's going to give you a nice, moist, juicy, flavorful result. So here we go. Alright, now that we've trimmed the brisket down, time to rub it up. Today I'm using Butcher's Axe Bullseye Beef Rub because I find it as an awesome rub to go with brisket. It just works so well. So we're going to rub this up pretty liberally, and I'll hold this rub shaker up nice and high. That way I can get a real even spread along all edges of the brisket. Get it rubbed up really well. Then just pat it in to the meat, let it set in there. Can't forget to do these edges as well. Get all of these done, pat rub those in. Now that all the sides are done, we'll go in, flip this thing over and do the underneath as well. Rub that side in, and we are ready to go. Now that is one good looking brisket. Time to get this brisket in the fridge until tomorrow morning. Alright, so we're doing this brisket on the Oklahoma Joe's Highland offset smoker. So what we're going to do is make a nice bed of coals in the firebox. Not too big, but not too small. Enough so that we can use these ironbark wood splits here. A nice size split, one that is well sized enough to fit in the firebox, a firebox of this size, and a coal bed that is big enough to allow this to burn without smouldering it. And producing a nice clean smoke, but not, we don't want to create a fire so big that it's going to overheat and shoot these temperatures up on this cooking chamber. So you want a coal bed big enough to stabilize the clean burn of the wood, and a wood split that isn't overkill or too big for the firebox and for the offset smoker you're cooking on. So I'm going to get these coals lit, well, when it's night and when we're ready to cook this brisket. And then we're going to get our first wood split on, and we'll go from there. Alright, it is 2 AM and it's time to get this smoker fired up. So we've got the Oklahoma Joe's offset Highland smoker that we're using today. So I'm going to light these natural fire lighters here, and we're going to put a full chimney full of heat beads, briquettes, charcoal, original briquettes onto the fire lighters. And in the next 15 to 20 minutes, this chimney full of coal should be fully lit. You can see I've also placed a big bed of coals next to it, because when this chimney is lit, we're going to pour it all over the unlit ones. That way we're going to get a whole heap of coals for our coal bed, and it should last most of the cook, if not the entire cook. And we're just going to crack this fire door open as well to let some oxygen through to that chimney to let these heat beads light up faster. And we're going to preheat our first log split by putting it inside the cooking chamber, right next to the little output of the firebox door there to let it heat up. We've got our brisket here, and it's been about 20 minutes. We've got these hot coals put in and over on top of the other charcoal, and we're just going to let that burn nicely. Give it a few minutes, let it get nice and hot up to temp. Well, we've put our drip tray in here, so what we're going to do is just move these grates over, and we're going to get this brisket on. But first, we're going to move this wood on top of the firebox, because now that firebox is getting real hot with those coals in there, this wood split's going to get real warm too and preheat and should give us a nice burn. Alright, we'll open this firebox door back up, allow some oxygen through, and we'll get this first wood split on. So because it's nice and hot in there, and we're at around 250 Fahrenheit, a lot hotter in the firebox though, we put it on top of the coal bed here, a nice size wood split of Aussie ironbark wood. And you can see there it's lit up nice clean burn. That took about 35 seconds to catch a light. We avoided getting too much white acidy smoke. We're at 250 Fahrenheit in here, and we've got a nice thin blue smoke rolling. So it's time to get this brisket on. Just going to put this drip tray under here. It's going to catch all those juices. One, it's going to stop our bottom of our pit from getting all messy. But we're also going to use those juices later and pour it over the brisket when it's resting. Alright, come back and check this thing very soon. You can see that wood's burning nicely. Okay, we're 1 hour into this cook and the temp is holding steady at 250 Fahrenheit. So we're going to get another wood split on because you can see here, this first one has burnt down. And in order to keep that temperature steady, we want to get this next one on before the fire starts to go down too much. Because it's been preheating, it should light up pretty quick. And whilst we've got the firebox door open, we'll also, rather than coming back later and messing with the cooking chamber temps, we'll give our brisket a nice spritz now. Now I'm just using water for this, but feel free to use apple cider, juice, whatever. Alright, it is 9 AM and we are roughly 7 hours into this cook and we have hit the stall. Now basically the stall is where the brisket halts in its cooking internal temperature, and it can last anywhere from an hour up to 4, 5, 6 hours even, depending on the size of your brisket. Now basically you can either ride it out, or you can do some form of Texas crutch, or wrapping your brisket to help get through it. So we're going to do what's called boating. Basically we leave the top of the brisket exposed, that way we don't wreck the nice bark we've got formed, but we wrap around the sides and create like a little boat nest, and that allows the juices of the brisket to drop down into that boat reservoir and evaporate back up and steam into the meat to keep it not only juicy, but help push through that stall to get the temperatures up quicker. Let's come back and check it shortly. 11:30 AM and a quick peek and a spritz. Take a look at that bark. We're getting there. 11 hours into this cook and the temp is still holding steady at 250 Fahrenheit, and it's almost time to put another log split on, which will be our, coming up to our 6th log split here. You can see it's preheating here, and that brisket's looking good. Okay, so currently we are sitting at around 185 Fahrenheit internal. You can see that this thing's looking pretty good. The boating has kept all of that moisture in there and allows that to evaporate and be soaked up by the meat, keeping the bark, because we're not wrapping the top of it, but it allows it to keep it super juicy. Just to make sure we keep that moisture on there and keep that bark forming nicely, we'll give it one more spray. And I reckon we're a few hours off this thing probing tender and then being able to rest it in the esky. We'll come back and check this thing as it gets closer to that 200 Fahrenheit mark. So we're 12 hours into this cook, and our wireless smart thermometer is showing us that we are sitting at around 198 Fahrenheit. What we're aiming for is around that 200, 202, 205 Fahrenheit area, but it could be either side of that. What we really need to do is probe for tenderness on all sides of the brisket. Let's have a look. So you can see here with the thermometers probing, 187 roughly, so nowhere near done, and it wasn't probing right through. But through there's almost no resistance. It's 190, maybe a little bit more on there. 181. So you notice this side up here is a lot more done. Well, it feels a lot more, there's less resistance than over this side. Probably because this side's closer to the flyer. So we might rotate this around, but really you want every edge of your brisket to probe like butter, just straight through. Regardless of what the temp is, it'll all be around the same area. What you'll find is some are going to be harder than other areas and it's not done. You've got to try and find that balance between it all being pretty well probed and done, but then some not being overdone to the point where it's falling apart, and then, you know, some is not done and it's still rough. It's finding that sweet spot. If you have to rotate your meat around, you know, to give different exposure to the areas in the cooking chamber, do that. It's just a real game of when you want to make the call that you think all of it's done enough, and yeah, it's a lot of trial and error, but you're aiming for that complete probing like butter tenderness. We'll come back and check this in another hour or so, and I reckon we'll be close to it. Okay, our wireless smart thermometer is reading at around 202 Fahrenheit, and we're just probing this thing now for tenderness, and it is probing right through like butter on every side of the brisket. Time to get this thing off and rest it in the esky for an hour. Okay, so we've taken the brisket off the pit, and now we're going to pour over those juices that we saved from earlier. Whilst we're resting this thing, these juices are going to just be soaked right up, and it's going to give us a really moist and juicy final result while getting that bark softened for us, ready to slice. So now that we've done that, we're going to wrap this thing up in the tin foil. I've got about 5 or 6 layers here of tin foil, and we're going to wrap it up really neatly and really tightly. We want this brisket really well insulated while it's resting. Now that we've done that, we're going to get it into the esky wrapped in a towel, and the temperature should even go up over the next couple of hours, allow all the juices to go back into the brisket and give us the best possible result. You do not skip this step. Let's check it again in a couple of hours. Woo, look at that. That bark looks great. So it's been resting in the esky for about 2 hours. Total cook time of 15 hours. Time to slice. And that is going through with very little resistance. And look at that smoke ring. Keeping the bark perfectly intact, a perfect colour on the smoke ring, very juicy. And we're getting no force really on this when we're slicing. We're getting those perfect pencil thin slices. The colour looks great. It's very tender, look at those juices. The smoke ring's incredible. And this is a great result, take a look at that. And that's how you know it's not overdone too. It's not falling into little shreds as you're slicing it. You're getting those perfect thin slices, but while maintaining that perfectly juicy, tender result. And look at that, just pulls apart. That is an excellent result. And there you have it, offset smoker brisket. Cheers guys, don't forget to subscribe. I'm Mark from Grill Mark's Barbecue. Cheers.